welcome to this IABM Online Future Trends live event, where we're going to be looking at cloud and virtualization. My name is Ben Dales, and I'm the Digital Media Manager here at IABM, and I'm delighted to be the host for this first event. So before we get started, I wanted to bring IABM's Head of Insight and Analysis, Lorenzo Zanni, in to talk about and set the scene around cloud and virtualization.
Yes, hi, Ben. Basically, according to preliminary IABM data, cloud and virtualization is the most important priority in the industry's technology roadmap. And as you can see, the COVID-19 pandemic has had an impact on roadmaps, because we can see that at home remote production is the third most important priority. If we focus a little bit on remote production, this is also the most important priority for important sectors such as sports and news. Coming back to cloud, we can see that adoption is still high at 45% according to our preliminary data. And most broker SME organizations still prefer to adopt hybrid cloud workflows. So according to our preliminary data, most buyers still prefer to deploy the cloud technology in manage and publish workflows, which is very much consistent with our historical data. It's interesting to have a look at the top barriers and advantages of cloud. We can see that the top barrier is rising content storage cost, which allies the challenges of cloud economics for some broker SME organizations. Security is the second challenge, and it's interesting that is also one of the most important advantages for people that have already moved to the cloud, which allies the cultural issues as well related to security. And in terms of top advantages, we can see that the most important one is an efficiency-related advantage, so the lower cost of ownership, but also greater collaboration, greater geographical collaboration, which is, of course, very important in this period of social distancing.
Thanks, Lorenzo. That was really useful and great to set the scene around cloud and virtualization. If you want to delve further into this, the IABM have recently released our latest cloud report in collaboration with Net Insight. And again, please follow the link in the resources tab and you can find out more. So on to today's panel. We have joining us today Anna Lockwood, Head of Global Sales at Telstra Broadcast Services, George Bower, Director of Channel Marketing at Telestream, Per Lindgren, CTO Media Networks at Net Insight, Thomas Gunkel, Market Director of Broadcast at Skyline Communications, David Phillips, Principal Architect M&E Solutions at Cloudian, James Gilbert, CEO at Pixel Power, and Craig Dwyer, Senior Director, Global Strategic Solutions and Pre-Sales at Avid. So a large panel, so let's get cracking with the questions. So the first question for you all, according to the research that we have carried out on this crisis, some media companies have drastically shifted their risk preferences regarding moving to cloud-based operations. Is this consistent with your recent experience?
Yeah, I mean, from a Telstra perspective, we've definitely seen a huge acceleration towards cloud-based working, and specifically around both video, collaboration, and gaming. So I think in terms of what we've seen in our world, people are coming to us for the infrastructure to support cloud workflows, to support the move to the cloud. And Telstra has a internet backbone that operates internationally, AS4637. And we've seen a lot of requests from cloud providers, from security and DNS providers, from SaaS providers, both to peer with us, and if they're already peered with us, to increase the interconnects from 10 gig to 100 gig, to have more bandwidth. So as a service provider, we're definitely seeing both cloud companies having a lot more demand for our services, and direct media and broadcast customers who perhaps were not so focused on the cloud before, moving into cloud workflows and remote workflows.
the COVID-19 crisis has definitely highlighted, for example, some weaknesses in many companies' disaster recovery strategies. It has, for some, accelerated any plans they had to use more cloud-based operations in place of or to supplement their own data centers. Now, for some, this was a plan to enable a change in the cost structure of their business. But for many others, it's been about adding flexibility and to enable them to be better placed to cope with some future crisis. Now, fortunately, many of those customers have either been testing or experimenting with our cloud-based SaaS solutions for a few years. So it's actually been quite easy for them to make some of those changes and accelerate it.
COVID has definitely accelerated the trend towards using both cloud and cloud-based remote operations. So I think this has been out of necessity. People looking for the agility and the remote workflows, the cloud, together, I would say, with the IP and internet offers. So, and many companies are using cloud as a complementary solution, so also for offloading. But I would say the biggest trend is the shift towards remote and distributed workflows allowed by the cloud and the cloud workflows.
Yes, we see more and more opportunities and real projects where people move their operations to the cloud. That certainly started with the distribution part already a few years back. Now more and more in terms of playout, but also more and more production workflows shifting to the cloud. Technology is ready. There's still certainly some challenges how to get your content in and get it out of the cloud again. But we have the technology in place. You see new, new technology coming up. You see new protocols coming up like LIST and SRT. Latency issue is not such an issue anymore. And at the end, when the technology is there, people can benefit from the advantages going to the cloud, reducing the upfront costs, their financial risk, going more for a pay-as-you-grow investment model, and to use the cloud mainly to extend peak capacity with those third-party cloud offerings to manage their investments in a proper way, to avoid overspending, and at the end, they are also to reduce their spare stock they have on-prem today and to avoid idle time of the inventory. This is what we see a lot when you have on-prem deployments.
I think a lot of times the choice has been taking a risk on cloud-based operations or having no operations at all, being that they're, kind of data center central, facility infrastructure is like locked down and, don't have access to kind of traditional baseband, appliances and devices. So, there's no question that the current situation has accelerated, a lot of companies' digital transformation initiatives. It's really just a matter of okay, is this going to be their, Band-Aid patch effort, or, do we actually have the time to kind of lay the groundwork and foundation for what's going to be our next generation infrastructure?
Shifting their risk preferences really means that I think they're more amenable to considering cloud. You can't really rush a move to the cloud. It's something that needs to be planned carefully, and it's not something you can do on a whim just because of a crisis like coronavirus. But certainly it has raised awareness and it's made people think more seriously about cloud. I mean, I think particularly the kind of C-suite, because they would be talking about making their operations more resilient, and often that will involve cloud. But I think it's important not to confuse things between cloud and remote operation, because remote operation doesn't mean cloud. They're different things. And really, the thing that people have wanted the most during the crisis is remote operation, perhaps even using their existing infrastructure. But in many cases, the existing infrastructure is not capable of remote control from a different place or even from home offices. And it's interesting, at one of our customer sites, we were in the process of installing a new master control playout, which was remote capable. And the customer actually moved to using that quicker because of the pandemic, because it gave them the security that if they had to evacuate the building and have all their staff working from home, they could do that with the technology that we provided. So I think remote operation is perhaps, almost as key as cloud, but it's certainly raised awareness and made people more open to cloud, I think.
We have definitely seen clients accelerating using the cloud to give them greater flexibility for their workflows. But I wouldn't say that they've concluded that it's all or nothing. It's absolutely a hybrid workflow that they're looking for to enable distributed production where it makes sense.
That's great. Some really fascinating answers there. So moving on, some have had to rush moving to cloud-based operations in production or remote editing, for example. Which challenges remain to be addressed for media technologists in this area?
Yeah, so for us, we run our own broadcast operations center in Sydney, in Hong Kong. And when the pandemic hit, we had to make sure that we could go into our business continuity planning and make sure that we were ready for both remote operations, virtualized operations. And so we worked closely with our technology providers to make sure that we could continue to operate. It was a hybrid model. We did continue to have some hands-on presence in the broadcast operation centers, but a lot of the workflows and plans that we had been practicing for suddenly became more immediate and urgent. So we were able to then work with our own providers and move our own workflows more to the cloud and more virtual. Similarly, a lot of our customers came to us as part of their supply chain and said, we are now needing to move our workflows either remote or virtual. How is Telstra prepared to support us and help us? So both for our own work and for our customer services, we had to pivot and be ready very quickly in a completely new way of working.
Well, what we're hearing from many of them is that connecting and accessing equipment remotely has not been so difficult, but enabling security, highly secure and rapid access to content is still a challenge. Existing solutions, for example, require them to make copies or proxies of content, to share them, or to install desktop clients for remote access. And all of these steps, although they technically work really well, they restrict the creative process. They take time. They add time to a workflow where often time is not something they have. And sometimes the security is compromised. They're worried about making copies and distributing it. And for example, in direct response to that problem, we developed the Glim web-based media player. And just to show how, as an illustration of how businesses evolve, that went from a customer request or an idea to a deliverable solution in just a few months. So I would say security and speed of access is probably the biggest technical challenge for many people.
The biggest barrier was before, when it comes to remote and distributed production, was culture barrier. And I think this has been really broken by the pandemic, because we just had to make the move. And I think now when people have tried it and seen it works, it's here to stay. Of course, some areas will go back and it will be like a hybrid environment. We're looking specifically for remote production over internet and cloud environments. I think things to really look at for the challenges that we from experience seen is, of course, you need to have a security and secure network and a high quality solution, and things like low latency for remote productions you have to look into, as well as the synchronization for like stream alignment. So those are some of the areas definitely we have had to look at specific solutions for the customers.
Technology changes, people speed up, our customers speed up taking that challenge, but there's a lot of challenges left. We have high bandwidth content in our industry. People work with proxies in remote editing. That's the example you just gave, and somehow we have to bring those together. There's two approaches. Some vendors say we bring the render engines as close as possible to where the content is. Some others say we put the content as close as possible to where my render engines are. But at the end, you have something very distributed. And two big challenges, as always, is bandwidth and storage. Bandwidth today is available for many situations, but we still see a lot of situations when it comes to, for example, live interviews where you don't have a proper fiber. You still have some regions, some places where you don't have access to high bandwidth connections. That's something that will be addressed with 5G. The industry is pretty confident on that one. But then other challenges, how to manage those very dynamic systems, how to provision those. What about security? That's something that comes into place on all those cloud-based workflows. So it doesn't matter if it's a single cloud or multi-cloud. And then we also have a lot of discussions that's maybe interesting with our customers on converged networks. Today, people often have separate networks for the real-time media network and another network for the editing network, to go back to your example. And they want to use a converged network to use the network in the most efficient manner. But to do that, we do that with Data Miner, that we manage real-time feeds and also file-based feeds. To do that in one single network, to use this in an efficient manner, we have to be capable to also dynamically throttle down the bandwidth of a single editor, somebody working remotely, whenever you need more real-time bandwidth at a certain point in time. And that's something which is not always possible today, to say we can really bring a lot of dynamics to the bandwidth management. That's something we have a lot of chats with the vendors to see how we can address that. Editing, when you have a little hiccup, that's probably not such a big disaster, but when we talk about those converged networks, under any circumstance, nobody can afford to do some editing and at the same time impact any real-time contribution or distribution.
I think there's a lot of the companies that we talked to, were in process for something like a migration from their legacy tape-based archive to, object storage, or a combination of like a hybrid solution, the combination of private cloud, public cloud. And, again, being that, they were potentially locked out, from their facilities for, kind of managing the physical media, the kind of mechanical, nature of tape libraries. They've really had to kind of struggle in order to keep up with production, actually access their archives effectively. But, a lot of the companies that we, talk to, it's really cemented for them. It's like, we really need a online, accessible, active archive that we can access anywhere. And this really kind of clarifies for us the importance of that.
The biggest challenge, whether it's production or live, is managing the latency. In a live environment, you've got to be able to react to what's happening in the images you see before you. And in a fast action sports game, for example, then latency can be an issue. And the job becomes a lot harder for the operator who's making those manual switching operations. So I think the technology that reduces the latency, regardless of whether it's cloud-based or remote production, is really one of the key things that needs to be addressed.
Yeah, so I think what we found is that, so there's been a couple of aspects to this. Some clients have moved very quickly to the cloud and they've actually realized it actually isn't as hard as they expected. And maybe it wasn't just the technology, it's operations as well, getting the creatives and the teams to work in new ways. So we have some clients who moved in a few days and sort of anecdotally have sort of said this would have normally taken us a couple of years to get everybody to do this with us. So that's been interesting. I think in terms of sort of getting to a point where they can do this sustainably, reliably, there are still a number of aspects that clients need to think through. So technically, how do I synchronize my assets between my editorial system on-prem, like in my facility, to the cloud? We're working to make that easier. And then secondly, how do I now collaborate when perhaps my producer, my editor, the director, they're not all in the same room anymore. So thinking through some of that collaborative workflow, using some of these different tools for collaboration, and also some of the tools like we're using here, for example, Zoom. So you can kind of have what they call we call an over-the-shoulder view. You can see what the editor's doing, you can see the output of their monitor and still have that dialogue and feedback, which is so important in the creative process.
It's really interesting, some of the challenges which we're going to see coming up. So according to our research, a major area of focus for media companies when it comes to cloud is streamlining multi-cloud workflows. Does the industry still have to develop when it comes to this?
There's still a lot to learn, and orchestrating multi-cloud or even multi-region workflows within one cloud infrastructure requires a substantial level of expertise, and especially important to manage and control your costs in using cloud services. And just one example, the egress charges for media. In other words, the cost of taking something out of one platform and moving it to another can be a significant and sometimes hidden cost. I wouldn't say hidden as a way of criticizing the cloud providers because they detail it, but it often comes as an unpleasant surprise to the customers. And we would suggest that the major cloud infrastructure providers are naturally not the best place to offer multi-cloud solutions, whereas independent agnostic vendors such as ourselves can orchestrate across any of the major cloud infrastructure providers and help people to manage the total cost for the end user. And just as one example of that, our Vantage Cloud Port services evolves what we call follow the media technique to ensure that any compute intensive services are deployed in the same place where the source content is stored, just to avoid those egress charges. As one other comment though, we have also seen recently some very innovative, completely new startup businesses evolving, and they're all cloud-based, and they're almost always multi-cloud approach for the same reasons. So yeah, the industry, it has a lot to learn, but it's amazing how quickly it is learning.
I think a lot of the solutions today are proprietary, or they are tied to specific cloud providers, etc. I think when this matures, we will see a willingness to go to more open platform, multi-cloud environments, hybrid environments between both private and appliance-based environments, where you work in complement that with cloud production workflows happening at the same time. So definitely moving towards multi-cloud and hybrid solution environments are going to be key.
First, a few comments on why do people go to the cloud? There's this thinking that it's accessible in a very easy way. There is a low risk. It's easy to scale. You can deal with peak demand in an easy manner. You reduce the lead time, but at the same time, there's cost attached to it. There's a lock-in risk, and that's what people brings to maybe the multi-cloud environment, that you don't want to rely on a single cloud provider to avoid your single point of failure, to have the most redundant system you can imagine. Same applies for CDNs. Everybody goes for a multi-CDN approach. But that needs to be managed, needs to be monitored in a very dynamic way, in a very close way. And not only the distribution part, but really, the end-to-end workflow, to say what happens when I do multi-cloud. It starts a little bit before. I have to be aware of what happens still probably on-prem throughout my MCR, my processing to the head and to the end consumer. Another challenge we see there on multi-cloud, it needs multiple skill sets. Your employees, they have to manage different cloud systems. There's not a single API anymore, as you probably had it in your own on-prem fabric. You have to deal with different vendors. The problems you had in the past, let me say it like that, they don't go away when you move to the cloud. They're just different. And also the workflows are different, the processes are different. And we said this before, don't forget about security. Security in operation, but also security for your files, for your feeds. Industry talks about encryption mechanisms. There are some approaches already, I guess, in the making for file-based operations, but for live feeds, when it's all about low delay contribution, distribution, that's not an easy one.
What we see a lot of really kind of the trend in the industry is the kind of rise of these overlays between, on-prem, public cloud, multiple public cloud services, multi-cloud. I mean, Cloudian itself supports all three major public cloud vendors. We can tier data. You can still access through your Cloudian S3 URL, but you can have the data can be instanced from all 3 major public clouds. But really, I think the industry is moving towards, I want an abstraction layer over all of my media assets, wherever they may be, on-prem or in the public cloud. And we've worked a lot with our partner, Storage Made Easy, and their file fabric, which can essentially index all of these different storage targets, storage silos, from cloud providers to on-prem SAN and NAS, and really provide an Elasticsearch index across all of these different storage locations.
Each cloud provider has a different set of tools, different APIs, SDKs, different ways of working. And the problem is, if you develop a solution with one cloud provider, then you can't easily move to another and you're locked in. It's a bit like being locked into an automation system. So ideally, you'd want to architect your cloud-based infrastructure to be resilient between cloud providers, so you can easily move from one cloud provider to another and make the most of the commercial advantage that would give you. And even in thinking about a main and a backup chain for something, you might want to have your main chain running on one cloud provider and your backup running on another, because any kind of major outage is less likely to affect 2 different cloud providers at the same time. But really, the tools to allow this kind of cloud agnostic orchestration are still in development. There are providers who offer that kind of tooling, but it's not particularly easy to use, and it requires quite a lot of specialist knowledge, which doesn't traditionally exist within the broadcast environment, DevOps, and so on. So it's a challenge, certainly, and I think there's still work to do to make solutions more cloud agnostic.
I think what we're seeing in this sort of innovation wave as we move to cloud, certain areas are ahead of others. So distribution, for example, and sort of digital content management, those are early areas in the cloud. So sort of getting your assets to those endpoints, from on-premise or from other clouds is an important workflow. But we're also now seeing people starting to think further upstream. So when I'm on set, how do I get my assets from on set? How do I get my material, across into the cloud, and then potentially shareable? So it's, again, if everyone's working in a distributed manner, perhaps I have graphics, audio, it's very much in certain markets, the post-production market is very much, a specialist market, and you work with your experts in different facilities. And the assets were very portable. In the cloud, they're maybe not as portable, or if they are, there's potentially a cost to move the assets between clouds. So there's definitely work there that we're looking at with the industry to innovate and make it easier to make that supply chain smoother.
Some great answers there. So aside from a few cases, Cloud PlayOut has been mostly dedicated to non-live on-demand content before the pandemic. Have you seen this changing with the advent of coronavirus? Will media companies use this as a primary delivery mechanism, or rather as a backup?
Over the last 5 years, we've done more and more with esports companies and gaming companies. And one of the things that we noticed about working with esports companies from the beginning was that they were both cloud native and digital native. So they didn't really have the legacy workflows or the legacy infrastructure to worry about when they were trying to innovate their productions. So from the beginning, working with esports companies, they were completely in the cloud. And we learned a lot about cloud production and really pushing the cloud production envelope by working with these customers. So when the global pandemic hit and a lot of live sports went into hiatus, we saw that our esports customers were still actively able to create content online, edit and distribute content through cloud workflows, and really didn't miss a beat, except for, of course, not being able to gather in person together to compete. but they could move competitions into the virtual online realm. And they already had an end-to-end production workflow that was entirely digital and entirely in the cloud. And I think what we then saw from our more traditional clientele was that they ramped up very quickly, learning from some of these existing workflows and practices, and have adopted some of the workflows that esports companies were doing from the very beginning. So we were lucky in the sense that we had our esports clients to show us the way.
My personal opinion, cloud-based playout obviously lends itself very well to VOD and OTT services. Remains to be seen if it's the most effective solution for the massive scale linear broadcasting services that form the bulk of our linear broadcast output. And we'll talk a little bit later, but all the eggs in one basket has risks. And so I personally think there'll be some time where cloud-based playout is a backup to the main linear output, but absolutely will be the main vehicle for delivering VOD and OTT content.
We've seen both, but it's definitely a big shift happening. I think in general towards remote and distributed workflows, and as you said, the cloud environments were more before happening in the non-live and perhaps in the OTT workflows, but now it's out of necessity. We have had to move towards remote and distributed workflows, and of course the agility and flexibility that you get from cloud-based operations is something you're really looking for when we both need to do it remotely and distributedly, but also when you have to set things up very quickly, and people are literally sitting at home doing the productions, and you need to tie in people sitting at different parts. We also had an example where we had Swedish commentary commenting Italian soccer sitting in Spain, and of course cloud-based, internet-based workflows allows for this to happen very quickly.
Projects maybe more in the US than in Europe, where companies shift to the primary delivery to the cloud. That's certainly true for OTT, but also more for linear, traditional playout moving to the cloud. On the other hand, we see also a lot of company, they initially thought the live events will be the driver, but now with Corona and the pandemic, there are not so many live events anymore. So that's a bit a different angle now. On the other hand, Corona drives more and more the work from home aspect. People, they had to leave their office overnight, the MCR, the production. Contribution, working from home, to have your studio in the living room and deal with those challenges. That's something we see a lot. And to adapt to that, from maybe experience from our customers, we did a few interviews recently with our customers, how they could manage that challenge. Moving from the MCR, from their operation to their home overnight was not a big deal. They could still use the same platforms. They could use our platform to remotely log in to manage the system. But there are a few things they don't have. They don't have access to video and audio. Before, they were sitting in front of the big MCR with tons of video and audio feeds. That's not easy to bring those feeds to everybody's home. Cloud multi-viewers, cloud probing, that's a big topic for them. People and companies need to invest. And the other big challenge we see here is communication. When people work from home, they have to adapt to a completely different way of how to communicate. And we all use those tools during our daily business, like Zoom, as we do here, or Microsoft Slack, or other communication tools, or Slack or Teams. And that's something we are also working on, to integrate those in the overall workflow. That we say we don't have two different worlds anymore. There's not a data miner world and then the communication world as we communicate. That goes together. So we are working on integrations with Teams, with Slack, that people can still communicate in a way as they were really sitting next to each other. That's one of the big investment areas on our side.
If you go back to the traditional model of I've got an OB van and it's connected to a satellite truck, that was such a tried and tested, and really trusted methodology for transmission, that, you know, even though these kind of like, let's call it, you know, IP or internet-based, you know, play out and transmissions have been available for a while, you know, there's not many engineers or technical directors who really wanted to trust their, you know, $1 million event, you know, multi-million-dollar event on, you know, the IP. Kind of flip that on its head, and it's like, okay, we need to go this route. I think it's going to take time to really develop that trust and confidence in that, because you can have certain locales where there's only one ISP, you know, in the metro region, and therefore you don't really have redundancy because everything's really routed through their, you know, internet point of presence. So, you know, I think technologies, you know, companies coming along like Cicd that allow you to kind of synchronous, you know, kind of manage a synchronous transmission across both IP links and like cellular links, and achieve something like a hitless merge, you know, failover, is really going to kind of instill a little bit more confidence once engineers and you know, productions get a little bit more kind of runtime under their belt.
It depends on the media company. Some, particularly those who are more agile and less conservative perhaps, may use it as their primary means of delivering content. But a tier one media company is more likely to use it as a backup and maybe put thematic channels on air via the cloud. There's no real technical limitation to doing it for all the channels, but there may be commercial reasons not to. And we've certainly seen during the pandemic, tier one broadcasters having more appetite to dip their toes in the water with cloud. But even so, I think it's likely to just be backup and thematic type channels initially.
We're seeing a transition. So I think many of our clients are reassessing their physical facilities in the context of realizing they can do more with the cloud, and partly because maybe they don't even need those physical facilities. I mean, real estate in, you know, the prime, you know, sort of global cities, London, New York, Paris, you know, LA, that's very expensive real estate to have a data center if you can leverage the cloud to replicate that sort of infrastructure. So when you're so we do have clients who are really reevaluating where do I need a physical presence for my teams? Perhaps I don't need as much facility space in these locations. And again, if I can move more of my services to cloud, then I think that they'll benefit. You know, they see benefits in taking that approach. Yeah, so I think we're in a transition, but I think many clients are now really thinking through, you know, the primary distribution will be cloud centric. You know, play out will be from the cloud, but then they need to architect it in the same way that we built broadcast play out. They need to build in the redundancy and resiliency to make that a reality.
So developing technologies for the cloud world imposes a change in development times with a greater focus on speed. Have you had to change your practices as a result of this?
We have to perhaps react quicker to try and meet the demands of our sports, entertainment, media customers. And I would say that, yes, the expectation to both create projects, deliver projects, test and deploy projects has absolutely accelerated in speed. And there is the urgency that their business depends on being able to change and react to the global pandemic and make sure that they are not left behind with all the different changes. So I think for us, the speed is being driven by our community and our ecosystem base. And we've worked very quickly and collaboratively along with our customers to make sure that we are accelerated in both the project timelines and the delivery timelines. For us, we're a little fortunate because we have our own internet backbone network and we have our own fiber and media network. So for us to be able to increase bandwidth, scale up, introduce flexibility, because we own our own infrastructure, that was perhaps quicker and easier for us to do. So we've worked very closely with our clients to be able to meet their accelerated timelines.
Absolutely. It's been an incredible change for our company. We've seen requests from customers for new features and new products even to help aid their moves to cloud-based and remote working practices. The work I described on the Glim product is just one example. Work we did to produce a lower cost, what we call Lightspeed Live Capture to enable remote production with editing at home. Is another one where things came from request to product in 2 or 3 months. And that was unheard of before. Our traditional development roadmap, and not just ours, I think most companies, would be product developments were planned several quarters ahead. It's evolved. We have to be much more reactive. We have to work on much shorter term cycles. And as we said, new features and sometimes even entirely new products are being developed and delivered in just a few months.
We have been moving towards cloud-based solutions for quite some time now, 4 or 5 years. Our latest launches, like the Nimble Edge, are native cloud. And as you said, the whole development cycle is different. It's faster, and I think also, and it's a little bit different when it comes to live production, but overall, I would say cloud development, it's more like a fail-fast culture. You can do things very quickly, and today, with the cloud tools, you can get something up and running in days and weeks. Of course, when looking at live and mission-critical productions, for the bigger type of sports that we actually today do in these environments because of the situation right now. The security aspects, the quality aspects, things like synchronization are challenges in this. And of course, you have to be much more careful. But it will change not just the media landscape and the media ecosystem, it is changing also the way we develop the solutions for it.
Actually, we started already a little bit before. Since about 2-3 years, we turned our company into a much more agile company. We've built DevOps teams to really work on a fully automated deployment pipeline. This is what we have done internally. We have a continuous integration, continuous delivery pipeline. And then we now came up with what we call a data miner cloud platform to provide new software on a more regular basis, new drivers. Before, as a customer, when you were a data miner customer, you had to actively download the latest server. You had to go to our server, download and find the latest driver. Now that will be deployed fully automatic. So that's much, much faster as we have ever been before. But also, we use the cloud platform to provide additional services to operate data miner and to run the operation. When I say operate data miner, those are things like automated load balancing in data miner and to work on the system architecture. When you run out of data miner compute power, that we can spin up new data miner nodes automatically somewhere to automate also that part. And then when it comes to the operation, we have new features and functionality, what's called like connect and share, that we have single click connections to interface with cloud providers to really bring down the provisioning time to automate this again before you go live. And when you go live, there's an interesting topic we are working on that we call data sharing, that we can share data through the cloud in an encrypted way. Again, security is important with other customers. Good examples are, as always, live events. You want to share real-time data with your end customer, how you perform, how the cloud is performing, all the monitoring and all the reporting you maybe did in the past after the actual event. People expect, your customers expect to do this in real time. We have live access to KPIs, to metrics, to your dashboard, something you only had access to in the past internally. And that's something you need to share with your customers and with other service providers as well.
I think what we have really kind of responded to from our customer base and from the market is really an emphasis on security, right? So it's like all of these kinds of, kind of urgent push to cloud-based, unmanaged network infrastructures has been out of necessity. And it's been, it's also been, this is the future of, media production and post-production really. But at the same time, it's a kind of Wild West, brave new world where all of the security protocols are not well known and not well understood. And there's tremendous gaps and holes that end up kind of all the different links in the chain have to be properly secured. So we've put so much development and engineering work on security in the past like 12 months, and have released S3 object lock for ransomware protection, as well as really hardened our software stack against like hacking and penetration, in order to get all the security certifications that are required by both government agencies, but increasingly media and entertainment companies.
Pixel Power already has an agile development process, so we haven't had to change our practices really. We've been planning for virtualized playout for many years, and part of that planning is not just about the code and what you write, but the process and how you respond in a rapid and effective way to customer requirements. As a company, Pixel Power has always been responsive, but for several years with the agile process, we are highly responsive to requirements in a changing environment. It's really about the collaborative relationship with the customer and how to keep the speed and agility in that process.
The way we've been developing our software for cloud has been something that we've been evolving over the last few years. And actually our edit on demand solution that we sort of have increased focus on because of the pandemic and this sort of remote work demand, that we're going through what we call like a Cicd pipeline, so a continuous innovation, continuous deployment pipeline. So it's much that solution is changing very much more quickly. So at least monthly releases, potentially even faster, and deployed very quickly, because you can automate so much of the deployment and the testing in the cloud. That is really where the advantage comes from on the sort of the development side.
It's interesting to see how things have had to change in workflows and practices. So the final question for you all, in the next few years, which area of the cloud market do you see as growing the most as a result of recent market trends?
I think, again, for us, it's really around the gateways into and out of cloud workflows. So really making sure that our networks, both on the fiber side and on the internet, the IP transit side, have a ramp on to the cloud ecosystem, a ramp off to the cloud ecosystem, and that we really become the gateway or the glue to support cloud providers, security providers, our broadcast and media customers, with that very easy ingress and egress from a cloud environment. So for us, that's where the focus is, making sure that we've got a great way to take content into and out of the cloud, and provide the hybrid solutions that our clients are looking for now, where they will work on-prem, off-prem, from different parts of the media workflow, seamlessly going into and out of cloud environments. And that's where we've been putting a lot of our focus and attention, and I think that's where we'll continue to see rapid growth and acceleration in the future.
Interesting. That's a crystal ball. I wish I could be accurate, but best guess, what we're involved in, media processing and quality control, especially for the high quality original content, it's now possible to manage it economically and effectively in cloud services. So we believe that more companies, I don't think all of them, will migrate a portion of their on-premise transcoding, processing, QC to cloud services. Though we believe that on-premise processing will be retained for some uses. We think OTT playout will become almost exclusively cloud-based as current on-premise hardware encoders reach the end of their life. And following on from that, OTT quality of service monitoring is likely to follow along with that. But as a word of caution, just as we've seen this week, yesterday the entire Google suite of services went down for 6 hours in Europe. So customers would be wise to have some diversity in their technology. going all into the cloud, or especially with a single infrastructure provider, is not without its risks. So, summarize, we believe, our belief is that yes, more people are going to use cloud infrastructure, but for many, a hybrid approach, and that means some on-premise technology and multiple cloud infrastructure providers is probably going to be the optimal scenario.
So I think before, definitely the on-demand and the OTT workflow on the managed and delivery of those has been the biggest shift happening first. Because of the pandemic, I think production workflows and remote production environments have had to move into the cloud and to IP and Inter-based workflow. So I think now when we hopefully soon get out of this situation, it will stay. I think people have tasted this, seen it works, and seen also the agility and flexibility it brings. But I think it will be a hybrid environment for quite some time. People will use cloud for what it's best at, and it is also a good complement to more traditional production workflows, where you can bring in people remotely very quickly, like the commentaries, but also for experts or talent sitting at home being part of the production. And this much more agile and flexible, dynamic production environments, that's definitely here to stay.
Certainly today we see play out growing a lot, but we're pretty much convinced that everything, the whole production chain that includes MCR operations, live productions, will move to the cloud. That technically it's possible to do everything in the cloud end to end, really from contribution to distribution to the end customer. That certainly happens already in the OTT world. Traditionally play out a bit less, as we said, but then we see those new models like infrastructure as a service, platform as a service models growing, and altogether, the live production market, that's something that will also move to the cloud. We had a low latency issue in the past, but now we have new technologies. People talk a lot about the CMAF, the common media application format, using CTE to really tackle the low latency issue we had in the past. And once we have overcome that and technology is improving, there are not many boundaries that prevent people going to the cloud. That's from a technology perspective. But then on the other hand, we also see a few customers, they went to the cloud, and especially when it's 24/7, for cost reasons, they made a decision to go back or to go back to a hybrid model again. So I think it will shift. There will be a shift to the cloud. At the same time, people will face reality, and not every time when you think cloud was the best way, that will stay. There will be that hybrid world for a long, long time.
I think, you've seen like cloud editing and remote editing has just been, a tremendous, shift in everybody's focus over the last 6 months or so. So everybody from the vendor side to the customer side is trying to develop and deploy solutions in order to enable remote and distributed teams. And there's been it's amazing what you can do in a web browser these days, as far as frame accurate cloud editing, with different kind of proprietary platforms. And even the major players like Avid are completely virtualizing and putting their tools, essentially exposing their tools in a kind of browser-based model. I think what you're really going to see also in the future, in addition to the development of cloud editing and remote editing, is virtual workstations are just really going to become the norm. And so not so as far as content creation, the 2D, 3D graphics, and also VFX, it really just has become so easy to spin up virtual workstations with high CPU count, high core count, and high GPU functionality, that the experience of all of that aspect of content creation, it just gets better and better. And why would you spend $10,000 or more on hardware that when you're not using it is just, kind of costing you money. So being able to dynamically spin up all of these virtual workstations and then spin them down really to optimize costs, I think is really where the industry is going.
It's inevitable that we'll see more content moving to the cloud, and not just being moved to the cloud, but perhaps being originated in the cloud, as that's where you can really get the economies, or end up not paying a premium at least for having a cloud-based origination and distribution network. And by holding the content in the cloud, you can edit it there, you can play it out from there, and you can have a singular workflow for both your linear channel play out, for VOD and catch up, and other type of content that you want to deliver on all the variety of devices that are out there today. And really the way to unify that delivery process is to have everything in the cloud, and then you don't have to move things up and down, which is inefficient and can be costly as well, depending on the pricing models. I think origination in the cloud is growing, and there will be a gradual adoption that will increase in pace. I don't think there's going to be a kind of a tipping point or anything like that. It's going to be a gradual process that increases in pace. But really having the content complete in the cloud does globalize and democratize the whole production and delivery process. You can shop for content, you can shop for an editor anywhere in the world rather than just being limited to your local area. So I think it does offer some very exciting possibilities, and will open up the ability to have better quality content and a greater variety of content to appeal to a wider audience.
We touched on it already. I think it's about hybrid workflows. It's going to be making sure that the creative process can work efficiently, within a facility, outside a facility, and that all of the sort of the soft skills, if you like, and the kind of interaction and collaboration. I think those are the areas that we're going to see a lot of innovation around. The sort of practical aspects of making our tools and systems work in the cloud, we're kind of through that phase. But now it's about sort of how do I really make this efficient? How do I make sure that I've got, I can manage all that interaction that's so valuable in the process. So that's a big focus for us, kind of making sure that we're enhancing the creative tool sets and the processes that sit around it.
That was really interesting and some great insight from all of you there. Thank you very much for joining us today.